I never planned on working the night shift at a highway rest stop. It was supposed to be a temporary job that would help me pay rent until I found something better. The pay was unusually high for a cashier position, but I was too desperate to question it. The listing had been online for less than an hour when I applied, and less than 20 minutes later, I received a call telling me I could start that same evening. The rest stop sat along a long stretch of highway, with nothing around it, except thick forest and empty road. The nearest town was over 30 minutes away, and most people only stopped there to buy snacks, fill their gas tanks, or use the restroom before continuing their trip. During the day, the place looked ordinary enough. At night, it felt completely different. Every passing truck sounded like it was shaking the entire building. When I arrived just before 10 that night, the parking lot was almost empty except for 2 parked trailers and an old pickup truck that looked like it had not moved in weeks. The building itself was clean, well lit, and surprisingly modern. Inside, there were shelves of snacks, refrigerators full of drinks, a coffee station, and a row of security monitors mounted above the counter. Everything looked exactly like any other highway convenience store. The manager was already waiting for me. He looked like someone who had been working night shifts for years. There was nothing strange about him at first, but I noticed he looked exhausted even though his shift had technically ended hours earlier. He kept checking the clock every few minutes as if he was counting down to something. The training lasted less than 30 minutes. He showed me how to operate the register, refill the coffee machines, clean the counters, and check the fuel pumps from the security monitors. It was all simple enough that I wondered why the previous employee had left such an easy job. Before walking out, the manager unlocked a small drawer beneath the register and pulled out a laminated sheet of paper. It wasn't part of the employee handbook, and it wasn't attached to any company documents. It looked older than everything else in the store, with faded corners and scratches across the plastic. Instead of placing it with the other paperwork, he slid it directly in front of me and waited until I looked down at it. Across the top, in large black letters, were 5 words: Night Shift Employee Rules. At first, I assumed it was some kind of joke left behind by bored employees trying to scare new hires. I almost laughed before I noticed the manager's expression. He wasn't smiling. If anything, he looked relieved that the paper was no longer in his hands. He picked up his keys, turned off the office lights, and walked out the front door without looking back. A few seconds later, I heard his car pull onto the highway, and then everything became quiet again. For the first time that night, I realized I was completely alone. I looked back down at the laminated sheet, expecting to find ordinary workplace instructions about cleaning schedules or closing procedures. The first rule was anything but ordinary. I left the laminated sheet on the counter for almost 5 minutes before picking it up again. The longer I looked at it, the more I noticed how old it was. The edges had turned yellow beneath the plastic, and several small scratches ran across the surface, as though dozens of people had carried it around in their pockets before someone finally decided to laminate it. It did not look like something the company had printed. It looked like something employees had tried to preserve. I turned it over, expecting to find a name or a date on the back. There was nothing. The reverse side was completely blank. The first rule was short enough to fit on a single line. It instructed me to lock the front doors at exactly 2:13 every morning. The wording was unusually specific. It did not say around 2:13 or before 2:13. It repeated that the doors had to be locked at exactly that time. It even warned that doing it 1 minute early or 1 minute late was the same as not doing it at all. I checked the entrance and noticed there was no automatic locking system. Whoever worked the night shift had to walk over and lock the doors by hand. The second rule caught my attention even more. It explained that if a truck entered the parking lot without its headlights on, every light inside the store had to be switched off immediately. There was no explanation for why. It simply instructed the employee to remain out of sight until the truck left the property. I looked through the front windows toward the highway. The road stretched into darkness in both directions. Every vehicle I had seen since arriving had its headlights on. It seemed impossible for a truck driver to travel that road in complete darkness without crashing long before reaching the rest stop. The third rule was stranger than the first two. If any customer asked what time they had arrived, I was never supposed to answer the question. According to the sheet, I was to act as though I had not seen them enter the store. I found myself reading that sentence several times. People asked for directions, prices, and receipts all the time, but I could not imagine anyone walking into a convenience store in the middle of the night just to ask when they had arrived. The remaining rules continued farther down the page, but I folded the sheet and slipped it beneath the register instead of reading ahead. I wanted to prove to myself that none of it mattered. If the first few rules turned out to be nonsense, there was no point wasting the rest of the night thinking about them. The next hour passed quietly. A young couple stopped for fuel and left with bottled drinks. An elderly truck driver bought coffee and a pack of crackers before returning to his cab. A man wearing work boots rushed into the restroom and drove away less than 3 minutes later. Every customer behaved exactly the way I expected them to. By midnight, the parking lot was empty again. I leaned against the counter and watched one of the security monitors. The cameras covered every corner of the property, including the fuel pumps, the parking area, the entrances, and the narrow path leading behind the building toward the dumpsters. Nothing moved anywhere on the screen. That was when I noticed a small detail that had somehow escaped me since the beginning of my shift. The clock behind the register was the only clock in the building that kept perfect time. Every other clock was wrong. Some were 1 minute fast, others were 2 minutes slow. Even the microwave in the employee break room displayed a different time from the wall clock near the coffee station. Only the clock above the register matched the time on my phone down to the second. I looked back at the laminated sheet beneath the register and remembered how the first rule depended on an exact minute. For the first time that night, I stopped wondering who had written the rules. Instead, I started wondering what had happened to the people who wrote them. The longer the night went on, the more I found myself watching the clock instead of the customers. The laminated sheet had already changed the way I thought. Every passing vehicle made me glance toward the parking lot before returning to whatever I had been doing. I kept reminding myself that I was standing inside a highway rest stop with security cameras, working lights, fuel pumps, and a highway that hundreds of people used every day. By 1 a.m, business had almost disappeared. A middle-aged couple stopped to buy bottled water and coffee before continuing their trip. A delivery van pulled in for fuel, stayed less than 5 minutes, and drove away. A tired truck driver came inside, stretched his back while walking through the aisles, bought a sandwich from the refrigerator, and disappeared back into the night. The ordinary routine helped. I wiped down the coffee station, emptied one of the trash bins near the entrance, and reorganized a shelf where bags of chips had started falling over each other. Every few minutes I looked through the large glass windows at the empty parking lot. The fog that had been hanging over the highway earlier had disappeared, leaving the sky unusually clear. Moonlight reflected faintly off the tops of the parked trailers at the far end of the lot. For the first time since arriving, I began wondering if I had misjudged the manager. Maybe every new employee received the same laminated sheet. Maybe it was nothing more than a strange tradition meant to entertain people during long night shifts. After several quiet hours, that explanation seemed far more believable than anything else. I reached beneath the register and slid the laminated sheet back into the drawer. I decided I was done thinking about it. A soft electronic beep interrupted my thoughts. The register displayed a reminder that the nightly sales report would print in 15 minutes. I glanced up at the clock, 1:58 a.m. without realizing it. I had spent almost 4 hours inside the store. The next 15 minutes passed without a single customer entering. Traffic on the highway slowed down. Usually I could hear trucks passing every few minutes even if they never stopped. Now there were stretches where nothing passed at all. I walked toward the entrance and looked outside. The fuel pumps stood empty beneath the overhead lights. The vending machines beside the building hummed quietly. The trees bordering the property barely moved in the breeze. Everything looked normal. When I returned behind the counter, my phone vibrated with a notification from a friend asking how the new job was going. I smiled for the first time that night. I typed that the place was unbelievably boring and that I was getting paid to sit inside an empty store. I almost added something about the strange employee rules before deciding against it. Reading the message back to myself made the whole situation sound ridiculous. I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket. The clock read 2:08 a.m. Immediately, I remembered the first rule. I tried ignoring it. Instead of staring at the clock, I focused on organizing cigarette cartons behind the counter. I counted them twice, even though I already knew the inventory was correct. Another glance. 2:10 a.m. I walked over to the coffee machine and checked the fresh pot that had finished brewing earlier. Another glance. 2:11 a.m. I looked toward the parking lot. Still empty. No headlights approached from either direction of the highway. I laughed quietly at myself and shook my head. I was letting a piece of laminated paper control my thoughts. Even so, I found myself walking toward the entrance. My hand rested on the metal push bar while I watched the clock above the register from across the store. The second hand continued its slow circle. When it reached exactly 2:13 a.m., I turned the lock. The click echoed through the entrance. I waited. Nothing happened. I stood there another 10 seconds. Still nothing. I smiled to myself, convinced the rule had been nothing more than an odd superstition passed between employees over the years. Then bright headlights swept across the front windows. A vehicle had turned into the parking lot. I instinctively checked the clock again. Barely 15 seconds had passed since I locked the entrance. The vehicle rolled slowly across the empty lot before stopping directly in front of the store. Its engine continued idling. The headlights remained fixed on the entrance. For nearly a full minute, nobody got out. Then the driver's door opened. A lone figure stepped onto the pavement and began walking toward the glass entrance. I instinctively reached toward the lock. Halfway there, I stopped. The first rule had never instructed me to unlock the door. It had only told me exactly when to lock it. That difference suddenly felt important. I left the door locked and watched as the stranger came to a stop on the other side of the glass. The figure did not knock. It did not wave. It simply stood there staring into the brightly lit store while I stared back, waiting to see who would make the first move. The stranger remained outside. I stood a few feet away from the entrance, trying to make out the person's face through the reflection on the glass. The overhead lights inside the store turned the windows into mirrors, making it difficult to see beyond them. All I could distinguish was the outline of a man wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He never moved. Most customers who found a locked convenience store would knock on the glass, pull on the handle, or leave after realizing the store was closed. This man did none of those things. He stood with his hands at his sides, staring straight ahead as though he already knew I was watching him. I looked at the clock. 2:15 a.m. 2 full minutes had passed since he had walked up to the entrance. I considered unlocking the door. The rule had only instructed me to lock it at exactly 2:13. It never mentioned keeping it locked afterward. I even took a step toward the entrance before another thought crossed my mind. The vehicle had entered the parking lot only seconds after I turned the lock. Coincidences happen. This one had excellent timing. I stepped back behind the register and kept watching. The man still had not moved. The longer I looked at him, the more details stood out. He never shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His shoulders never rose or fell as though he were breathing. Even the brim of his cap remained perfectly still, despite the breeze that had been moving the trees outside all night. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Using the camera, I zoomed in on the figure outside, hoping the screen would reveal details my eyes could not. The image looked completely ordinary. The man appeared to be standing exactly where I expected him to be. There was nothing unusual about his clothes, nothing unusual about his posture, nothing unusual about the parked vehicle behind him. I lowered the phone. The man seemed closer, perhaps only one step. I quickly looked back at the phone. The distance was normal again. I lowered it once more. The man appeared to be standing where he had been before. I blinked several times, trying to decide whether the reflections were playing tricks on me, or whether I was somehow losing an argument with a window. I decided to stop looking. Instead, I walked over to the coffee station and pretended to organize the lids and sugar packets while watching the entrance through the reflection in one of the refrigerator doors. Nearly another minute passed. When I finally looked toward the entrance again, the man had turned around. He walked back toward the vehicle. He climbed inside. The engine continued idling for several more seconds before the vehicle slowly pulled away from the building and disappeared onto the highway. I waited until the taillights vanished completely before walking to the entrance and unlocking the door. The cool night air rushed inside as I stepped onto the pavement. The parking lot was empty. I looked toward the spot where the man had been standing. The concrete was dry except for a thin layer of dust that passing trucks often left behind. My own footprints from locking the entrance at 2:13 were clearly visible. I followed them with my eyes until they reached the doorway. There should have been another set leading to the place where the man had stood. There were none. I searched the area around the entrance twice before accepting what I was seeing. The vehicle's tire marks were still visible. The footprints were not. I hurried back inside, locked the entrance once more, and returned behind the register. For several seconds, I simply stared at the laminated sheet lying beside the cash drawer. I no longer cared whether the rules sounded ridiculous. Whatever had just happened outside had only one thing in common with the paper. It had happened exactly when the paper said something unusual would happen. I unfolded the sheet again and continued reading. The next rule warned me about a truck that would arrive without its headlights. For the first time that night, I found myself hoping the rules would be wrong. I did not put the laminated sheet away this time. It remained open beside the register where I could read it without unfolding it again. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted back to the fourth rule, almost as if I expected the words to change. They never did. The instruction was still as simple as it had been the first time I read it. If a truck entered the parking lot without its headlights on, every light inside the store had to be switched off immediately. I was not to remain near the windows. I was not to watch the driver. I was not to let the driver know I had seen the truck. There was no explanation beneath it. No warning about what would happen if I ignored it. Just a single instruction sitting on a laminated sheet that was somehow outperforming my entire sense of self-preservation. I looked outside again. The highway had returned to its usual rhythm. Every few minutes, another pair of headlights crossed the darkness before disappearing beyond the trees. A few vehicles slowed as though they intended to stop, but each one continued past the entrance without turning into the rest area. I wanted another ordinary customer. Someone asking for directions. Someone buying coffee. Someone complaining about fuel prices. Anything that would make the last 15 minutes feel less ridiculous. Instead, the store remained empty. I walked through the aisles pretending to straighten products that did not need straightening. I lined up candy bars on the shelves until every wrapper faced the same direction. I pushed drink bottles to the front of the refrigerators and wiped fingerprints from the glass doors. Eventually, I found myself back behind the register. The laminated sheet was still waiting. I checked the security monitors. One camera overlooked the fuel pumps. Another faced the truck parking area. Another pointed toward the entrance where the strange customer had stood only minutes earlier. The final outdoor camera watched the narrow service road behind the building. It was little more than a strip of cracked pavement leading toward a fenced dumpster enclosure and the edge of the forest. I had not paid much attention to it earlier because nothing ever seemed to happen back there. Now I found myself watching it more than the others. The picture remained perfectly still. That struck me as odd. When I had stepped outside earlier, I remembered feeling a breeze against my face. The leaves had been moving most of the night. On the monitor, however, the branches looked frozen. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute before convincing myself the camera had probably captured a moment between gusts of wind. I forced myself to stop looking. The clock above the register read 2:41 a.m. I picked up my phone again, hoping another message from my friend would distract me, but the battery had dropped to 6%. I plugged it into the charger beneath the counter and watched the screen light up for a second before going dark again. Every small sound inside the store suddenly stood out. The compressor inside one of the refrigerators clicked on. Ice shifted inside the soda machine. Somewhere in the ceiling, the air conditioning vents gave a soft metallic pop as they expanded. Ordinarily, none of those sounds would have caught my attention. Tonight, they had my full attention package, including premium membership. Without warning, every outdoor security monitor flickered once. The picture disappeared for less than a second before returning. I frowned. The indoor cameras had not been affected. Neither had the register. The lights inside the store never dimmed. Whatever caused the interruption had only affected the cameras outside. I leaned closer to the screens. Everything looked normal again. Then I noticed something in the camera facing the highway. Far beyond the entrance, where the road disappeared into darkness, a large shape was moving toward the rest stop. At first, I could not tell what it was. The object blended into the night so completely that it almost disappeared whenever it passed beneath the trees. I instinctively searched for headlights. There were none. The shape continued growing larger. As it approached the entrance, I could finally make out the outline of a tractor trailer. Its cab was completely dark. Its headlights were off. Its roof marker lights were off. The only visible lights were two faint red reflectors along the side of the trailer that briefly caught the glow from passing highway signs. It should not have been possible. No driver could safely navigate that road without headlights. Yet the truck moved with complete confidence. It slowed as it reached the entrance. Then, without hesitation, it turned into the parking lot. I did not stop to question what I was seeing. My body had already made the decision for me. I reached for the main lighting switch beside the register and pulled it down. The fluorescent lights snapped off. Only the emergency exit signs, the glow of the security monitors, and the digital clock above the register remained visible. The truck continued rolling across the parking lot. Its diesel engine rumbled through the floor. I lowered myself behind the counter, careful not to let my head rise above the windows. The engine passed directly in front of the building. It never accelerated. It never stopped. It crawled across the pavement as though it was looking for something. Then the engine fell silent. I counted the seconds. 5, 10, 15. Nothing. Unable to resist, I slowly lifted my eyes just high enough to see one of the security monitors. The truck had stopped beside the fuel pumps. The driver's door was already open. Someone had climbed out. The figure stood beside the cab. Even through the grainy camera, one detail stood out immediately. The person was facing the convenience store, and then the figure began walking toward the front entrance. The figure crossed the parking lot without hesitating, looking around or changing direction. It walked in a straight line toward the entrance, as though it had visited the rest stop countless times before. I remained crouched behind the counter. Every instinct told me to peek through the front window, but I forced myself to keep my eyes below the glass. The fourth rule had been very specific. I was not supposed to let the driver know I had seen the truck. I had no idea how someone outside could know whether I had looked at them, but after everything that had happened since 2:13 that morning, I had decided the rules had earned at least one free trial period. The footsteps came to a stop. No knocking came from the entrance. No attempt was made to open the locked door. The only sound left was the hum of the refrigerators. I counted another 30 seconds before risking a glance at the security monitor. The front camera had gone completely black. I frowned and leaned a little closer. The other cameras were still working perfectly. The truck remained parked beside the pumps. The service road behind the building was empty. The truck parking area showed nothing unusual. Only the camera facing the entrance had failed. I looked away from the monitor and listened carefully. Nothing. The figure had somehow disappeared from the only camera that should have been showing it. A low metallic creak echoed through the building. It sounded like someone slowly pushing against the glass entrance from the outside. The door never opened. The lock held. The sound continued for several seconds before stopping. I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation for everything. Security cameras malfunctioned. Doors shifted in their frames. Buildings made strange noises at night. The problem was that none of those explanations accounted for the truck. Another sound reached my ears. This time it came from much closer. A slow scrape traveled across the floor near the coffee station. I turned toward the sound. The store was almost completely dark, making it difficult to distinguish shapes beyond a few feet. The emergency lights cast shadows between the aisles. The scraping stopped. Several seconds passed. Then it came again. The sound was moving. I looked toward the coffee station. Nothing. The shadows remained exactly where they had been. I looked back at the security monitors. The front camera suddenly came back to life. The entrance was empty. There was no figure outside the door. The truck was still parked beside the fuel pumps, but the space between it and the entrance was completely deserted. I checked every outdoor camera. Nothing. The driver had vanished. Then another thought occurred to me. If the driver was no longer outside, where had they gone? The answer came almost immediately. A single sharp tap echoed from somewhere behind me. It came from the hallway leading to the employee office. I slowly turned my head. The office door, which I clearly remembered closing earlier that night, now stood slightly open. A thin strip of darkness stretched across the floor from the gap. I stared at it, trying to remember whether I had left it that way. I was almost certain I hadn't. Then, from somewhere inside the office, I heard the sound of paper being turned. Several pages, as though someone was calmly reading through a stack of documents. The laminated sheet was still lying on the counter beside me. I looked down to make sure. It was, which meant whoever was inside the office was reading something else. I remained behind the counter, listening as another page turned inside the office. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was flipping through paperwork as though they belonged there. I tried convincing myself it had to be the air conditioner. A strong draft could disturb a stack of loose papers. The explanation lasted until another page turned. Then another. Each one came at an even pace. Whoever was inside was taking their time. I looked toward the hallway leading to the office. Nothing moved. The narrow corridor was illuminated only by the emergency lights, leaving the office itself hidden in darkness. From where I stood, I could see the door hanging partially open, but everything beyond it disappeared into shadow. I checked the clock. 3:12 a.m., 3 minutes remained before the restroom rule expired. Leaving the counter before 3:15 felt like a bad idea. The rules had already been right twice. I was not volunteering to become the third confirmation. The pages continued turning. Slow, steady, patient. The sound finally stopped. A few seconds later, the office chair rolled across the floor. It was only a short distance, but it was enough. The wheels squeaked softly before stopping with a dull click. Someone had just stood up. I waited for a figure to step into the hallway. Nobody appeared. Another glance at the clock. 3:14. 1 minute. I found myself counting the seconds again. The hallway remained empty. The office door never moved. When the clock finally changed to 3:15, I reached for the laminated sheet. The next rule did not mention the office. It only confirmed that the restroom restriction ended at exactly 3:15. That was good enough for me. I picked up the flashlight from beneath the register. It was an old metal flashlight with scratches along the side, probably left behind by another employee years earlier. I tested it once before stepping into the hallway. The beam cut through the darkness. Every step echoed against the tiled floor. The office door remained partially open. As I approached it, the smell of stale coffee became stronger. It mixed with the scent of old paper and dust, exactly the way small offices often smell after years of use. I reached the doorway. The flashlight revealed an ordinary room. A desk, a filing cabinet, a printer, several shelves filled with binders. Nothing looked disturbed. The office chairs sat neatly behind the desk. No one was inside. I swept the flashlight across the floor. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. The room was too small. I stepped inside anyway. The paperwork on the desk immediately caught my attention. Several employee schedules had been spread across the surface. Beside them lay a stack of handwritten incident reports. None of them were stored in folders. They looked as though someone had been reading them only moments earlier. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the top report. The date was nearly 12 years old. It described a routine overnight shift at the same highway rest stop. Most of the page contained ordinary notes about inventory and maintenance. Near the bottom, one sentence had been underlined several times. It read that the employee had ignored the rule about locking the entrance at 2:13 because a customer had arrived at the last second. The report ended there. There was no signature, no second page, no explanation of what happened afterward. I picked up another report. Different handwriting, different year. The final sentence had also been underlined. This employee claimed the truck without headlights had remained parked until sunrise. The report stopped in the middle of a sentence, as though the writer had been interrupted before finishing it. A third report. Another night shift. Another unfinished account. Every report ended the same way. None of the employees ever described making it to the end of their shift. The laminated sheet suddenly made much more sense. It had never been written as a prank. It had been written by people trying to leave instructions for whoever worked the next night. As I slowly placed the reports back on the desk, something caught the edge of my flashlight beam. Mounted high on the wall above the filing cabinet was a framed employee photograph. The picture looked old enough that the colors had begun to fade. 5 people stood side by side wearing the same company uniform I was wearing now. I recognized one of them immediately. He was the manager who had hired me earlier that evening. The date beneath the photograph read April 2008. I lowered the flashlight and stared at the frame. The photograph had been taken almost 20 years ago, yet the manager had looked exactly the same. I stood in the office longer than I should have, unable to take my eyes off the photograph. The manager stood in the middle of the group with the same tired expression he had worn only a few hours earlier. His hair was the same. His face was the same. Even the small scar near his left eyebrow was exactly where I remembered seeing it during my training. The date beneath the frame refused to make sense. I stepped closer, hoping I had misread it. The numbers were still there. April 2008. I quietly placed the flashlight on the desk and removed the frame from the wall. Dust had collected behind it over the years, leaving a clean rectangle where it had been hanging. Nothing suggested the photograph had been replaced recently. It had been there for a very long time. I turned it over. Nothing had been written on the back. No names. No explanation. Just an old wooden frame with a faded photograph that should not have existed. A sudden buzzing sound made me jump. The store lights flickered once before returning to full brightness. Power had been restored. For a moment, I almost felt relieved. The building looked normal again. Light filled the hallway. The office no longer felt like a place where someone had been hiding only minutes earlier. I placed the photograph back on the wall exactly where I had found it, and carried the incident reports with me to the counter. I wanted to read every one of them. There had to be an explanation hidden somewhere in those pages. The first few reports were almost identical. Each employee described an ordinary shift during the first few hours of the night. Each one mentioned receiving the laminated rules from the previous cashier. Each one admitted they believed the rules were nothing more than an old joke. Then the stories began changing. One employee ignored the instruction about the truck without headlights and walked outside to confront the driver. The report ended halfway through the next sentence. Another employee entered the men's restroom before 3:15 after hearing someone calling for help. The final paragraph stopped after the words, "I should have listened." Another report claimed every security camera had suddenly displayed the same hallway at exactly 3:42 in the morning. The remaining pages were blank. I searched through the pile looking for a report with a proper ending. There wasn't one. Not a single employee had written about finishing a complete shift. Every report simply stopped. These were not accident reports. They were unfinished journals. Each employee had started documenting the night as it unfolded, expecting they would finish writing after sunrise. None of them ever had. I stacked the papers into a neat pile and looked toward the front windows. The parking lot remained empty. The truck was gone. The strange customer was gone. The highway looked exactly as it had at the beginning of the night. It almost convinced me that everything was over. Then something on the security monitors caught my attention. Every outdoor camera showed the parking lot exactly as expected. The camera facing the hallway to the public restrooms did not. Instead of showing the hallway, it displayed a long corridor I had never seen before. The walls were painted the same pale color as the rest stop. The fluorescent lights were the same. The floor tiles matched perfectly. The hallway simply continued much farther than it should have. I stared at the monitor, trying to understand what I was looking at. There were no doors, no exit signs, no vending machines, just an impossibly long hallway stretching into the distance. A memory surfaced immediately. One of the rules. If every security camera suddenly showed the same hallway, unplug the monitor and do not reconnect it until sunrise. I looked back at the screens. The second outdoor camera flickered. Then it changed. It now displayed the same endless hallway. A third monitor changed a few seconds later. Then a fourth. Within less than 30 seconds, every camera in the store showed the exact same corridor. Not one of them displayed the parking lot anymore. Not one of them showed the fuel pumps. Every screen showed the same empty hallway extending into darkness. I reached toward the power cable beneath the monitors. Before I could pull it free, a small figure appeared at the far end of the hallway. It was too distant to make out any details. It wasn't standing still. It was slowly walking toward the cameras. My hand stopped inches from the power cable. The figure on the monitor was so far away that it looked no larger than a shadow. At first, I could not even tell whether it was walking toward the camera or whether my eyes were playing tricks on me. The hallway stretched so far into the distance that judging movement became almost impossible. Then I noticed something that removed all doubt. With every few seconds that passed, the figure became slightly larger. It was coming closer. I remembered the rule immediately. If every security camera suddenly displayed the same hallway, unplug the monitor. Do not reconnect it until sunrise. Until that moment, I'd been too distracted by what I was seeing to follow the instruction. I reached beneath the counter, found the thick power cord supplying the entire monitor system, and pulled it free from the outlet. Every screen went black. The store fell silent again. For the first time that night, I had no way of seeing outside the building. I had no idea whether another vehicle had entered the parking lot. I had no idea whether someone was standing outside the front door. I had no idea if the truck had returned. All I could do was trust that the rule had been written for a reason. I looked at the clock. 3:48 a.m. More than 2 hours remained before sunrise. Everything that had happened so far had taken place before 4 in the morning. According to the laminated sheet, the most important rule had not even happened yet. I slid the paper closer and continued reading. The final section contained only a few lines. They were shorter than the others, more direct. If the clock behind the register ever reads 4:44 a.m., do not look outside, no matter who calls your name. I read the sentence 3 times before placing the sheet back on the counter. It was the only rule that mentioned my own actions instead of something happening around me. The wording bothered me. It did not say I might hear someone calling. It simply assumed that I would. A dull thump echoed somewhere outside. I looked toward the entrance before stopping myself. Another thump followed. This one sounded farther away, almost like something heavy striking the side of one of the fuel pumps. The noise never repeated. I forced myself to remain behind the register. Several minutes crawled by. Without the security monitors, the building felt different. I had not realized how much comfort those screens provided until they were gone. I considered plugging them back in. The temptation grew stronger every minute. Surely one quick look would not matter. My hand even reached toward the loose power cable before I stopped myself. Every previous rule had proven to be there for a reason. Ignoring this one would be the first deliberate mistake I had made all night. I let the cable fall back to the floor. The minutes continued passing. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The refrigerators cycled on and off. Everything inside the store looked normal. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft. Calm. Clear enough that I recognized it immediately. It was the manager. He called my name only once. The sound came from outside the front entrance. The manager had driven away hours earlier. There was no reason for him to be standing outside the store before 4 a.m. The voice came again. It sounded patient, unhurried, almost friendly. I stared at the laminated sheet lying beside the register. The final rule suddenly felt much closer than before. Then I noticed the clock. It had just changed to 4:43 a.m. Only 1 minute remained. The second hand on the clock seemed slower than it had been all night. The manager called my name again. His voice sounded exactly as it had a few hours earlier when he had shown me how to operate the register. It carried the same calm tone, the same tiredness, and the same steady pace. If I had not known he had left before 10:30, I would have believed he was standing just outside the entrance waiting for me to unlock the door. I did not answer. The laminated sheet remained open on the counter. The final rule contained only one instruction. Do not look outside, no matter who calls your name. I kept my eyes fixed on the register instead. The voice moved. It was no longer coming from directly in front of the store. It drifted toward the windows beside the coffee station, continuing to call my name every few seconds. There were no footsteps between each call. The voice simply changed position. The fluorescent lights flickered once, then they settled again. The refrigerators continued humming. Everything inside the store remained ordinary. Only the voice refused to stop. I looked at the clock. 4:44 a.m. The moment the numbers changed, every sound outside disappeared. The manager's voice was gone. The distant traffic had vanished. Even the insects outside the building had stopped. I stood perfectly still. Then something struck the front glass. The impact shook the entrance. Another blow followed only seconds later. Then another. The thick safety glass groaned under the force, but it never shattered. I shut my eyes. The impacts continued at an irregular pace. Sometimes only one came. Sometimes 3 or 4 landed in quick succession. The glass held. I refused to look. The laminated sheet had never said how long the rule lasted. It only told me not to look outside. I counted slowly in my head to keep myself occupied. By the time I reached 100, the impacts had stopped. The silence returned. I waited another minute before opening my eyes. The clock read 4:47. Nothing happened. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Gradually, familiar sounds returned. A truck passed somewhere on the highway. The air conditioner switched on. The refrigerators resumed their normal cycle. The rest stop sounded normal again. I finally gathered enough courage to look toward the entrance. The glass was intact. The doors were still locked. There was no sign that anything had struck them. No cracks, no dents, no marks. If I had not heard the impacts myself, I would have believed nothing had happened. The eastern sky began turning a faint shade of blue. For the first time all night, sunrise looked like a realistic business proposal. At exactly 6 o'clock, another vehicle turned into the parking lot. It was an ordinary pickup truck. A man wearing the company uniform stepped out carrying a ring of keys. He unlocked the entrance from the outside and walked in as though this was any other morning. He smiled politely before asking how my first night had gone. For several seconds, I could not answer. Instead, I picked up the laminated sheet and placed it in front of him. He looked at it without the slightest hint of surprise. Then he folded it neatly and slipped it into the same drawer beneath the register. Only then did he look back at me. The exhaustion on his face reminded me of the manager from the night before. Without saying another word, he handed me my paycheck and wished me a safe drive home. I walked out of the building without looking back. I told myself I would never return. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was the rest stop. The caller explained that the overnight cashier had quit without notice and asked whether I could cover just one more shift. I was already preparing to refuse when I remembered something that had been bothering me ever since sunrise. Every incident report in the office had ended before the writer finished describing the night. Mine had not. If I was the first person to make it all the way through, then there was one thing none of the previous employees had been able to do: finish the story. So, that is exactly what I have done. If you ever find yourself working the night shift at a highway rest stop and someone hands you a laminated sheet of employee rules, do yourself one favor. Do not waste time wondering who wrote them. Wonder how many people ignored them. Thanks for watching. Follow for more stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe.